Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Circle.
Good morning, everyone. Am I visible and audible to you? Good morning. Am I visible and audible to you? Okay. So let's start our discussion with respect to this GS paper 2. Now see, the whole purpose of this discussion on GS paper 2 regarding the questions asked by UPSC very recently is, number one, to make you aware about the various dimensions which have been covered by UPSC in these papers which has been prescribed by UPSC in its syllabus of GS2. These papers are governance, constitution, polity, social justice, and international relations. So in this discussion, the aspect of constitution, polity, governance, and social justice will be taken by me, and this aspect of international relation will be covered by Mangal sir. So what is the point of this discussion? We will try to understand that how is the syllabus of GS paper 2 as provided by UPSC important. Now, UPSC has given the syllabus for a particular reason, and the reason is to provide you a kind of a roadmap on which or through which you can make your preparations comparatively easier by understanding important aspects. So, while going through the aspects or important aspects of syllabus, we'll try to understand what are the important topics which can be culled out in respective themes. So in this discussion, I have divided this topic into various themes. We will see, and based on these importance of topics in relation with the syllabus, we will see not only this year's paper or questions asked by UPSC in 2020, but also previous year's papers. So on this note, let's start our understanding about how the nature of questions have been asked by UPSC, especially with respect to GS paper 2 in all these dimensions. So regarding the distribution of paper, there is no surprise here. As you can see, most questions in the section of polity and governance takes somewhere around 10 to 12. So you can expect 150 marks related topic to be covered under the section of polity and governance. Now, this makes the topic of polity and governance very important and crucial for your preparation, as even 1 or 2 marks are important in your mains answers, as you have seen in the previous discussions. Regarding the distribution on social justice and international relation, more or less, the distribution of the proportion varies. At times it is equal, and at times the distribution between IR and social justice varies. Nevertheless, do not fall for this trend or do not go on a blind trend, because these are mere trends and we should not trust UPSC on this. UPSC at times may throw surprises. So the point here is we need to have a conceptual clarity on number of topics so that we are well prepared in our examination. Now regarding marks, as I have already said, that this year, if we combine polity and governance, we see questions approx marks related to polity and governance is approx 145, whereas IR and social justice more or less share somewhere around 110 and 105 marks. So this is more or less the even distribution so far in GS paper 2. Now, since we have seen that the section of polity takes a major toll in GS2, so let's identify few important themes in polity as well as governance, and also relate the aspect of governance with that of social justice. Because without social justice, which is also provided in the preamble, the aspect of justice, we cannot have a proper mechanism of governance. So the whole purpose of governance is to ensure social justice in the society. So this is one aspect which you must understand through your overall preparation. Okay. Let's take up our first theme for the day, that is center-state relationship. Now see, the syllabus provides for features regarding Indian Constitution, the features, amendments, significant provisions, and basic structure. Now you must go through these topics which is taught in your class, as well as through your blue books, which is your key source of study. Further, it mentions about functions and responsibilities of the union and the states, and also challenges pertaining to the federal structure. Now here, please note that this aspect of federal structure must be understood in a very diversified manner, because number of questions in the past has been asked on this concept of federal structure. Now, another thing I would like to add here is that when you study about these aspects of federal structure or say even the Indian constitution, please keep in mind this aspect also. That is, when you study about, say, for example, federal structure, separation of power, or any other aspects of legislature, executive, or even judicial setup, then please try to have a comparative analysis, at least with United States, United Kingdom, and one or two countries from Europe. And I'm sure all these aspects will be taught to you in your classes. Now, why I'm mentioning about US? Because US is the largest democracy, and from UK, we have borrowed most of our parliamentary setup. Hence, comparison with US and UK becomes of prime importance. So whenever we study about any aspect of the Indian Constitution, even that of judicial review, then we must, at least in our back of the mind, prepare certain notes regarding, say, for example, let's take, for example, separation of power. How is separation of power in India followed? Whether it is strict, loose, it comprises of checks and balances, or anything else. So while studying these, also always keep a track of these. Now, based on this, as we have said, India's federal structure is important. So this year, this question was taken up by UPSC. Let's take up these two questions. How far do you think cooperation, competition, and confrontation have shaped the nature of federation in India? Now, regarding the Federation of India, you must be aware about the Union of States. How is the Union of States formulated? And what does the Constitution of India provides? And how is the Union of States different from United States of America? Further, it says cite some relevant examples to validate your answer. Now, here comes the problem. Only by having a basic understanding on this topic of India's federal structure, you will not be able to write or give your answers, because you need to give recent examples. Now, the moment we talk about recent examples, you need to be very clear with respect to your current affair developments as well. For example, the whole purpose of Niti Aayog, when it was established, was to ensure cooperative federalism. So while studying about Niti Aayog, just keep in mind what are the different indices, what are the different reports which have been issued by Niti Aayog to ensure cooperative federalism. And Niti Aayog also releases some of the indices. These indices not only ensures cooperative federalism, but also competitive federalism. And regarding confrontation, there can be many instances of confrontation, not only between center and states, but also between different states. So here we can say recently passed farm laws regarding GST compensation cess or any other aspects, for example, interlinking of rivers. So states may compete with each other or even confront each other. And it is here where even the role of judiciary comes into picture. So based on all these understandings, this particular question was asked by UPSC. It says that Indian Constitution exhibits centralizing tendencies to maintain unity and integrity of the nation. Elucidate in the perspective of Epidemic Diseases Act, Disaster Management Act, and recently Farms Act. Now, if you see the nature of the question, mostly the nature is similar. However, the way of asking is different. Here it is asking about centralizing tendency of the union. Yes, the Indian Union shows centralizing tendency as per the Constitution, and it was also visible during the COVID lockdown, as most of the decisions taken by Ministry of Home Affairs were through the Epidemic Diseases Act at the ministry, also amended the Epidemic Diseases Act, and also through Disaster Management Act. And recently Farms Act also shows that there is certain centralizing tendency of the union. So while studying this topic, all these aspects which are mentioned here must be kept in mind. Now, even if you see previous year's papers, topics on federal supremacy and even federal constitution have been asked. So the point I'm highlighting here is that you need to have a proper notes when you are revising at the end moment regarding these important topics, as the notes will help you in revising these key points when you're about to appear for the examination. Okay, let's take up the next theme. And again, this is another very important theme regarding Indian Parliament. Now, the moment we talk about Parliament, the functioning of our democracy comes into mind, because it is only through the Parliament and through periodic election our government functions, and it is also called a parliamentary form of government. So on this note, this topic or this theme rather of Indian Parliament becomes important. Now the syllabus says Parliament and state legislature, structure, functioning, conduct of business, powers, privileges, etc. So based on these can be said to be some of the important topics on Parliament. Now see the question taken by UPSC this year. UPSC has taken a question on Rajya Sabha because last year 250th session of Rajya Sabha took place, where even Prime Minister Narendra Modi highlighted the importance of Rajya Sabha. So if you are aware about Rajya Sabha, at least you can approach this particular question. However, again, this question comes embedded with certain elements of overall development and certain aspects of current affairs. It says Rajya Sabha has been transformed from a useless Stepney tire to the most useful support organ in past few decades. Highlight the factors as well as areas in which transformation could be visible. See, so this is again, this can be said to be a dynamic part of the paper. So far we have seen that question comprises of core aspect of conventional topics taken directly from the syllabus of Parliament, since Parliament comprises of the President, Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. So this aspect of Rajya Sabha was directly asked by UPSC. However, the aspect of current is also embedded, or day-to-day developments with respect to Rajya Sabha is also embedded when UPSC is framing a question. So please keep these things in mind when you're making your preparations. Next question has been taken on speaker. Now, why speaker? Because speaker has been playing a very important part so far in the functioning of democracy. However, the problem with speaker is that speaker has certain power under 10th schedule regarding defection. And this is where the problem lies, because at times it can be said then speaker may act in a partisan manner or may not act impartially, because mostly speaker is from the same political party which the government is formed. So based on this particular question was taken up. It says, once a speaker, always a speaker. Do you think the practice should be adopted to impart objectivity to the office of Speaker of Lok Sabha? What could be its implication for the robust functioning of parliamentary business in India? See, the functioning of speaker has been correlated with that of parliamentary functioning. So we understand that key officers or key functionaries of parliament becomes important. So Prime Minister, Council of Ministers, and even leader of opposition becomes key areas where UPSC can attempt to make or frame questions in near future. So far, questions of Prime Minister has not been asked. So you may be asked a question on powers or functions of Prime Minister within the Indian Parliament. So the point I'm trying to highlight here is that you need to have a conceptual clarity on all these important topics related to Indian Parliament. See, even previous years, powers of Parliament regarding amendment was asked. Now, this is another very important topic which you must focus on while you are studying. That what are the powers of Parliament, not only regarding legislation, but also regarding amending the Constitution. And this part of the powers of the Parliament is also referred as constituent part of the Parliament or constituent powers of the Parliament. Now, the problem is that there was a very famous judgment known as Kesav Nanda Bharti judgment. And it said that there are certain basic features within the Indian Constitution which cannot be tampered with. And accordingly, it said that these basic features of the Indian Constitution cannot be amended. So again, we see certain restriction on the powers of Parliament to not amend those parts of the Constitution which falls within this aspect of basic structure. So again, you need to have a complete clarity on the concept of basic structure and also why this judgment of Kesav Nanda was pronounced. It was pronounced regarding 24th and 25th constitutional amendment. I'm sure you will go through all these in quite at length or quite detail in your classes. Now, another important aspect which is generally asked by UPSC is regarding the parliamentary committees. As you can see, questions on estimate committee, even questions on public accounts committee has been asked by UPSC. Now, another correlation is with respect to Public Accounts Committee and the functioning of Comptroller and Auditor General. Now, this again becomes, or rather this again opens another dimension regarding the accountability of the functioning of the executive. So overall, we can say that legislature in a way makes the executive accountable. And this aspect has been touched not only in the mains examination by UPSC, but even in the prelims examination. Now, see, these questions have been taken from the MTS. Now here, once you are cleared with your thorough understanding of the basics, it's very important to start your answer writing, because as you have seen yesterday, that answer writing comprises of 1750 marks, and it is the gateway through which you reaches the door of UPSC for your interview. Now, when you attempt for these 1750 marks, it's not possible that just on day one, you know everything. So writing your answer is an art, and this aspect has to be learned. You need to learn how to write succinct answers within time frame and also within word limits. Because UPSC, for example, as of now, it's following the word limit of 150 and 250 words. Maybe say tomorrow, it squeezes the word limit or expands the word limit. Say tomorrow, the word limit shifts to 200 or even 250 or 300. So the point here is that you need to be aware, and also you need to be in complete practice regarding your answer writing. Now let's take this question asked in mains test series. It says, enlist the major differences between federal and unitary system of governments by citing suitable examples. Do you agree that Indian Union has centralizing tendencies? Now the same aspect was asked by UPSC, which we have asked you in the prelims, in the mains test series. So if you had, so the point is, those students who had answered these questions must be in a better position to handle the questions asked by UPSC. Now, similarly, again, a question on India's federal structure and ensuring maintaining India's unity was asked. So these are very core topics on which you must have conceptual clarity. And if any question is asked by UPSC, you must be in a position to at least write minimum of 10 to 15 sentences on these aspects of federal structure, Union of India, as well as the nature of strains or cooperation between states and union. Now, again, these questions were also asked in the mains test series regarding cooperative federalism, competitive federalism, even on Raj Sabha, because we knew that 250th session of Raj Sabha had taken place. Hence, the question was that Raj Sabha is not only a house for second thought, but is also a guardian of states' rights. Highlight the relevance of Raj Sabha in Indian democracy. Almost on similar lines, a question was taken up by UPSC. Again, see this question on doctrine of separation of power. As I mentioned about, one of the key features of the Constitution is separation of power. So while studying about separation of power, you not only need to be aware about its comparison with foreign countries, but also the aspect of judicial review, as a similar question was taken up by UPSC this year. Now see, this question was, the question of separation of power was dealt in a very different way. And UPSC is very smart with playing with words. It says judicial legislation, which can be said to be another aspect of judicial overreach. Because when we are talking about separation of power, we know that the legislature, executive, and judiciary have given provided for certain prescribed powers within the Constitution of India. So when judiciary, which is responsible for interpretation of the Constitution, it enters into the arena of legislation, this can be said to be violation of separation of power. And hence, this aspect of judicial legislation becomes important. It says judicial legislation is antithetical to the doctrine of separation of powers as envisaged in the Indian Constitution. In this context, justify the filing of large number of public interest petitions or PILs, praying for issuing guidelines to executive authority. So basically, it is asking what are the role which has been played by public interest litigation in ensuring or in highlighting the aspect of judicial legislation. So again, you need to have a very conceptual understanding and analytical approach to answer such type of questions. Similarly, another question, now similar line, a question was taken in 2019 regarding same principle of separation of powers. It says, do you think that the Constitution of India does not accept the principle of separation of powers? Rather, it is based on principle of checks and balance. Explain. Now, as I have mentioned earlier regarding the comparison between that of US and India, comparison with that of UK also comes into picture, because even UK follows, does or rather does not follow strict separation of power, and it is based on checks and balances. So this is what this question was asking. Since we are talking about judicial legislation, so this theme of Indian judiciary becomes very important. Now again, the syllabus says provisions or features of Indian Constitution, structure, organization and functions of the judiciary, and appointment to various constitutional posts, including that of Supreme Court and High Court judges. So apart from the need and importance of judiciary and the appointments and removal part, this aspect becomes very important. The landmark judgment. Now, please understand one point here. Regarding the landmark judgment, these judgments can be on anything. It can be on rights, it can be on DPSP, it can be on fundamental duties, the need for fundamental duties, or even regarding center-state relationship, as we have seen in the case of interlinking of rivers. So, any landmark judgment which has any impact or which can be related to any part of the syllabus of constitution or polity must be gone through. And any landmark judgment which is there in the news affecting rights, you must go through them. So these two questions highlight the significance here. So this says that whether the Supreme Court judgment of July 2018 can settle the political tussle between Lieutenant Governor and elected government of Delhi. Examine. So a direct question on one of the very important judgments of Supreme Court, which more or less settled the confrontation which was taking place between the elected government of Delhi and also that of the, and with the Lieutenant Governor. Now you know that Delhi is primarily a union territory, however having a legislative assembly. And Delhi and the provisions regarding Delhi was added in the Indian Constitution through Constitution 69th Amendment. So all these aspects must be gone through with quite vivid detail to have an understanding to able to write these answers. Similar. Now another question taken in 2018 was regarding the tribunals in India. It said, how far do you agree with the view that tribunals curtail the jurisdiction of ordinary courts? Now this question was framed particularly keeping NGT in mind, or similar tribunals which have been established, especially post-1991 liberalization. So the aspect here is that tribunals on one hand take care of certain cases. However, because of these tribunals, litigation in courts have also increased because of appeal against the decision of these tribunals. So based on this understanding, this particular question on tribunal was taken up. Now moving further on comparison of Indian constitutional scheme with other countries. Now I have already taken or discussed in detail about this. The syllabus simply says comparison of Indian constitutional scheme with that of other countries. Now the moment we talk about constitutional scheme, it includes many things: legislature, executive, judiciary, separation of power, federal structure, etc. So based on this, this particular question was asked in 2020. The question was the judicial systems in India and UK. See, a question directly taken on judicial system of India and UK seem to be converging as well as diverging in the recent times. So there are certain aspects on they converge and there are certain aspects on which they diverge. So the question is highlight the key points of convergence and the key point of divergence between these two countries. Now see, this question was taken up because if you remember in 2019, the Prime Minister of Britain, Boris Johnson, he prorogued the session of UK Parliament. And this matter reached the Supreme Court as this decision was taken up against. Now the Supreme Court of UK very swiftly and in a very speedy manner, it settled this dispute in a, say, almost 18 days. So this aspect of speedy redressal of an important aspect of parliamentary democracy was taken up by United Kingdom. But we can say that in India, the aspects are not taken up so speedily. So based on these understandings of current events, this particular topic was, or rather this particular question was taken up by UPSC. Now this aspect was covered in the Focus magazine as well, since this point highlighted the importance of judicial setup and if they function properly, how it would change or ensure the mechanism of the working of the constitution. So this question becomes very important here. So again, regarding the important topics, when you study about the comparison of Indian constitution, keep this aspect of legislature, executive and judicial setup in mind, and also the nature of government regarding basic ideals, freedoms, liberty, secularism, discrimination, etc. And also a very important aspect of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That is how these different countries take up these important rights provided under UDHR. So these aspects must be kept in mind. So based on this, see, two questions again on France and US. On the France, the question was asked on the concept of secularism. It says, what can France learn from Indian constitution's approach to secularism? Now this had to be answered in 150 words. Now see, when you study about secularism, you know that the type of secularism or the concept of secularism as followed in India is quite different from what is followed in the Western countries. As in the Western countries, state has nothing to do with secularism, whereas in India, state can interfere in certain religious activities if it impacts public order, health, or morality. So on these three grounds, state can interfere in religious activities as provided under Article 25 of the Indian Constitution. So please have this comparative understanding of secularism when you study regarding fundamental rights. Based regarding US, the question was, India and US are two large democracies. Examine basic tenets on which two political systems are based. See, regarding in 2018, India and US started showing good relations with each other. And a number of questions was expected in the international relation part, but rather UPSC threw a surprise asking about the nature of two large democracy. As I said, UPSC is now more interested in these comparative types of questions which is being framed regarding India's relationship with other countries. And if you are aware regarding international relations, India is slowly drifting towards US as well. So similar question seems to be appeared in IR part also. So all these current developments must be kept in mind while going through about a particular topic. Moving to the next topic, very important topic is election. Now, the syllabus simply says salient features of Representation of People's Act and appointments to various constitutional posts, obviously, which includes the Election Commission. Now, regarding Election Commission, you must know about its role, power, functions, and importance, because periodic elections are a key or a cornerstone regarding the concept of parliamentary democracy. Because if elections are not held periodically, then we cannot say that India has a democratic form of government. So in this regard, conduct of elections becomes very important, and it is here where Representation of People Act 1951 comes into play. Now please understand that there are two Representation of People Act, or rather two legislation on election. One is the Representation of People Act 1951 for conduct of elections, and the other is Representation of People Act 1950 for delimitation of constituencies. And this delimitation or marking of boundaries is done by Delimitation Commission. However, Election Commission also participates in the process. So while going through these aspects, please have a thorough and clear understanding on the functions of or the nature of powers provided to Election Commission under Representation of People Act 1951 and also 1950. Further, important Supreme Court decisions relating to elections and also relating to criminalization of politics must be focused on, because these current events related to developments regarding elections becomes important, and questions may be framed by UPSC on all these aspects. Further, electoral reforms is another important areas, and it is here regarding conduct of elections under Representation of People Act where various electoral reforms becomes possible. So here you need to know about various powers of election commission to conduct smooth, fair and transparent election as provided in the Indian Constitution, and also the challenges which the election commission faces while conducting elections. Further, there is also a concept of election commissioner and chief election commissioner. So there is a saying, or there is a demand that EC, the election commissioner, should be brought to parity with that of chief election commissioners on certain aspects. So please focus on these issues as well. So based on these aspects, this question was taken up by UPSC. It was, there is a need for simplification of procedure for disqualification of persons found guilty of corrupt practices under Representation of People's Act comment. Now see, as I've said that recently Supreme Court gave a judgment on criminalization of politics. And based on this aspect of disqualification of people who can stand for election, especially under the Prevention of Corruption Act, was taken up by UPSC. So this particular question can be said to be part of simplification procedure for disqualification, because as of now, it involves a cumbersome process. So the UPSC is saying that what will be the benefit regarding the simplification of this procedure on disqualification. Similarly, this aspect of disqualification was again asked in 2019, and in 2018, certain controversy, or rather recent controversy regarding the use of electronic voting machine and also the challenges before the Election Commission to ensure trustworthiness of election. Now see, this aspect of trustworthiness of Election Commission is very important, because it is here where the credibility of democracy can be called into. If an election is not fair, then we can say that the democracy which is being practiced is not fair. So trustworthiness of Election Commission becomes a very important or key aspect while studying about the overall mechanism of election. Now, see, in all these questions, we see that the aspect of our core part of the syllabus has been embedded with that of the core part of the syllabus has been embedded with that of the current events. So when you go through these important questions on previous years, then please highlight or understand the day-to-day current events which has taken place, and also try to answer these questions. As if you answer these questions, at least those part of or those themes which are repetitively asked by UPSC, you can at least have a handy note on major part of such topics. And if we have so far, whatever we have seen, there are many topics like center-state relationship, federal structure, separation of power, election issues. On all these issues, questions have been taken up by UPSC. So the point is, UPSC tries to reach out to various corners of the syllabus and tries to find out that, and tries to cover the syllabus in a very holistic manner. So it is not at all advisable to you, for you to leave out any topic. Rather, have a conceptual clarity and understanding on each of these topics. And you are not required to remember facts or remember sections of these Representation of People Act, but rather you are required to understand the provisions. Even with respect to Constitution, you are not required to remember the provisions or remember the articles. No, not at all needed. But you must understand what has been provided within those articles. And these aspects have been very simply presented to you in your blue books. So please go through your blue books, because those are your basic sources, and aspects of NCERT has also been imbibed in your blue book. So go through your blue books, because your blue book covers all these basic aspects, and these can help you in making your notes. Now moving further to another important topic of local bodies. Now we see that local bodies have been playing a key role, especially after 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment. So regarding local bodies, not only about panchayat and municipality, but also how will the latest problems of urbanization impact the functioning of local body? Here, you also need to be aware about the recent 15th Finance Commission report and as to what they have mentioned, especially regarding empowering the financial prospects of local bodies, especially regarding grants to local bodies. And how has the 15th Finance Commission report dealt, especially providing grants to Gram Sabha. So all these aspects regarding your current events becomes important with respect to local bodies. So here, obviously, Constitution 73rd and 74th Amendment becomes a key aspect to understand and study. Also, about rural and urban governance, decentralization of power, because this is the whole idea on which 73rd and 74th Amendment was first of all taken into place. Views of Mahatma Gandhi becomes very important when you study about local bodies, because he gave a lot of importance to the idea of Gram Swaraj. And these aspects of local bodies might also help you in your essay writing practice. So these points must be gone through. Now, regarding local bodies, you must go through some of the important reports of Second Administrative Reform Commission and also few reports of Niti Aayog highlighting the importance and challenges, especially with respect to functioning of local bodies at grassroots level. Now, all these aspects have been provided to you not only through your blue books, but also through DNS, Focus Magazine, and even Compass Magazine. We try to cover all these day-to-day current event related aspects so that you are aware about these different issues. So based on this understanding of local bodies, this particular question was taken out. The question asked by UPSC this year was that the strength sustenance of local institutions in India has shifted from their formative phase of functions, functionaries and funds to the contemporary stage of functionality. Highlight the critical challenges faced by local institutions in terms of their functionality in recent times. So here you need to be aware about the contemporary or recent challenges which the local institutions are facing, especially regarding the financial aspect. Now, if you go through the Compass magazine, which we have provided, this aspect of issues in decentralization in local government was provided quite amply. And here it also mentioned about functioning, funds, and also the functionaries part. As you see, it mentions about issues with functionaries. So we understand that what sort of questions can be taken up by UPSC, and accordingly, we also try to provide you the most important part in the Compass magazine. Now, these magazines are provided just prior to your mains examination as your revision notes. So go through these notes as it proves handy just before your examination. Now, based on this as topic of local institutions, let's take up these questions. In 2019, the question was reservation of seats for women in institutions of local self-government has had a limited impact on the patriarchal character of the Indian political process. Comment. See, not only about local bodies, but also representation becomes an important part. And the whole idea of providing reservation to women was that the nature of patriarchal system which exists in rural India, especially in rural India, can be shifted more towards women-centric empowerment. However, this question says that even providing reservation has not changed this aspect. So here you need to be aware not only about why we are providing reservation and also the fact that what are the benefits of providing reservation not only to women, but also to other vulnerable sections of the society, such as scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, or even minorities. Now, another question asked by UPSC was to assess the importance of panchayat system in India as a part of local government. Apart from government grants, what sources the panchayats can look out for financing developmental projects? See, again, an aspect of functioning of panchayat with that of its funds. So we understand that the aspect of revenue for these local bodies is an important point. And second ARC had dealt at quite detail or at quite length regarding these aspects of provision of finance or funds for the local bodies so that they can function independently without any support or without any sort of begging from the state government. So the whole idea is to make panchayats and municipalities self-sufficient, not only in terms of their functioning, but also in terms of their revenue generating capacity. So all these aspects have been touched up by UPSC in the recent past. So the whole purpose of this discussion is to make you aware not only about different questions which has been taken up by UPSC in the past, but also the important topics which can be asked even in near future. So we can say that the approach of UPSC is number one, conceptual. You need to have a thorough understanding of all these concepts, and you must be aware about current developments which is taking place in the society based on your syllabus. If any current events which you see in the news, if you can map it with the syllabus, then yes, that part of current affairs becomes important. And this applies not only in polity, but also in the entire syllabus of UPSC in GS 1, 2, 3, and even GS paper 4. So moving on from the system of panchayat to this particular question which was taken up in the main test series. See, similar question which was asked by UPSC. It says, discuss the challenges faced by Panchayati Raj institutions in India. Also suggest measures to counter these challenges. Further, it says, another question, it says, despite the progress, many agendas of the Panchayati Raj system still remain unimplemented. Suggest reform measures in this regard. So, those students who had appeared or had written these answers, they must be in a better position to answer this particular question asked by UPSC, which was asked this particular year. So please start your answer writing practice once you're thorough with your conceptual clarity, as answer writing is very important. And as I've said, it's a gateway to reach the doors of UPSC for your interview. And every marks in every department of your mains is very crucial. Not only GS2, GS1, 2, 3, 4, and even your optionals. So you need to have a balanced approach while studying or while covering the important parts of syllabus provided by UPSC. Regarding important bodies, basically you need to be aware about constitutional bodies, statutory bodies, or any other bodies which is there in the news. So based on this particular question was taken up. It says, which steps are required for constitutionalization of a commission? See the word here, constitutionalization, constitutionalism, etc. Now these important words are taken up by UPSC now. Now the moment he says that what's the importance of constitutionalization of a commission, number one, it gives them constitutional authority or constitutional backup, and it provides more legitimacy, not only in terms of powers and functions of the body, but also to ensure overall development and also to ensure that such sections of the society are not deprived of social, economic, and political justice, thereby ensuring what is provided there in the preamble of the Indian Constitution. So please go through the provisions of Indian preamble and make conceptual notes on each of the topics or each of the adjectives as mentioned in the Constitution, as this question was also asked by UPSC to highlight the important aspects which is mentioned in the Constitution. So you must be aware about sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and also justice, liberty, equality, fraternity. So all these topics you must have a conceptual clarity. And for these, please go to your blue books so that you can have a conceptual clarity on these important words. Now, based on these important organizations, this year a question was asked on National Commission for Women. So we were talking about constitutionalization of a commission. So as we have said that it imparts legitimacy and also ensures overall development for the vulnerable sections to whom it is addressing. So it says that, do you think imparting constitutionality to the National Commission for Women would ensure greater gender justice and empowerment in India? So it's mentioning about two aspects, greater gender justice on one hand, and simultaneously women empowerment on the other hand. So all these aspects of National Commission of Women, you must go through regarding its important functions. So based on these ideas of important bodies, a question on Attorney General, National Commission for Scheduled Caste, and even CAG was taken up by UPSC. Now, moving further to the very next important topic of governance. See, this is one of the most important part of the syllabus. If you go through the syllabus, it says important aspect of governance, transparency, accountability, e-governance applications, models, successes, limitations and potential, citizens charter, transparency and accountability, and institutional and other measures, and role of civil service in a democracy. Now, directly keywords from the syllabus has been asked by UPSC this year in the topic of governance. See the question. Recent amendments to the Right to Information Act will have a profound impact on the autonomy and independence of Information Commission. Now, RTI is a very important tool for ensuring transparency and accountability with respect to government functioning. Take this question. Now, this question is on civil services reforms. It says, institutional quality is a crucial driver of economic performance. In this context, suggest reforms in civil services for strengthening democracy. So, the role of civil services has been asked not only with respect to strengthening democracy, but also in terms of delivery. Now, both these aspects have become important from the perspective of UPSC, especially for civil services. It's not only to strengthen democracy because they function as an agent of the center, but also and also to deliver economic performance, especially post 1991. So the whole prism through which civil services is viewed is changing over a period of times because of the complex nature of job which a civil servant is required to do in modern times. Further, based on this, fourth revolution, that is digital revolution, has been tagged along with that of e-governance. So here you must be aware about important e-governance plans or initiatives which the government of India has initiated. Now, based on this, previous year's questions have been taken upon same topic in information and communication technology based project programs, that is e-governance. E-governance directly, it says that e-governance is not about utilization of the power of new technology, but also much about critical importance of the use value information and also on citizens charter. So we see that in different years, UPSC tried to reach out to different parts of the syllabus. So here you must, while making notes, please have a thorough notes on all these topics, including role of pressure groups, NGOs, and also regarding impact of these schemes as an effort for last mile delivery. Now see, these questions have been taken up from the mains test series. Again, questions on e-governance has been taken up. It says that the role of civil servant in a democracy is multi-dimensional. So highlight challenges faced by the civil servants in fulfillment of this mandate, and also suggest recommendations by various government committees and second ARC. So again, civil services reforms and challenges faced by civil servants have been asked. Another question on RTI has been taken up as well. The question is, Right to Information Act was aimed at being a powerful beacon which illuminates the unlit corridors of the system. With regard to the statement, analyze the changes brought through the recent amendments to RTI Act. Now, almost on similar lines, a question was taken up by UPSC on recent RTI amendment, based on which the question was, what is the profound impact of the 2019 amendment? And similar question was taken up by MTS. So the point here is, please go through or please start your answer writing. It will help you in at least understanding and developing your mind frame or your thought process, not only with respect to that particular topic in place, but also what to write when a particular question is asked in the examination. Now see, these have been taken from the blue books, as these blue books provide for different aspects of Indian Constitution, those aspects which are important from your examination perspective and also provided in the syllabus, like historical underpinnings, evolution, features of the Indian Constitution, parliamentary federalism, making of the constitution, preamble, union and territory, citizenship, etc. Similarly, center-state relations, local government. So all these aspects which is there in the syllabus has been provided in detail in the Blue Book. Even aspects of governance like role of civil services in a society, in democracy, governance, citizen charter. So if you have a thorough notes for revision in the last time, just prior to your examination, all these will help you in attempting the answer at hand. And also answer writing practice is of utmost importance, because without that, it's not possible for any one of you to master the art of answer writing. Now, regarding our discussion, let's take up this particular question asked by UPSC. We'll try to understand that what informations are required to answer this question, and also how to approach this answer. Question says, recent amendments to RTI will have profound impact on autonomy and independence of Information Commission. So first of all, you need to be aware about what changes took place through RTI 2019 amendment. Very briefly, it changed the security in terms of salary and also tenure. As earlier, Information Commissioner or Chief Information Commissioner was appointed for a period of 5 years, but this aspect was amended and this security of tenure was removed. Further, the salary of CIC or Chief Information Commissioner was equivalent to that of Chief Election Commissioner. But this aspect was also removed because the government said that the provision of CEC has been provided in the Constitution, but the aspect of CIC has not been provided in the Constitution. So it's wrong to equate CIC with CEC. So this was the argument provided by the central government. So you can introduce your answer by mentioning about the fact that RTI changed the security and tenure in terms of the Information Commissioner and Chief Information Commissioner, right? Now it says discuss. So in your body, you can start by mentioning about why the government changed this, why the government brought about this amendment and the impact, right? So the impact can be, since an Information Commissioner or a Chief Information Commissioner is prone to be removed, hence it impacts or affects impartiality. The Information Commissioners can be easily removed. Based on this, there can be unnecessary interference, right, by the center. Informations can be blocked at the very ground level, at the level of CPI or SPIO, right? That is Central Public Information Officer. So all these can be said to be an impact, and overall, it affects the credibility of the institution, because no one will believe that whatever the Information Commission is saying is true, because they will think that it is doing this in certain pressure from the government. So overall, this aspect of impartiality or interference by the government on its impact on impartiality and its impact on credibility can be said to be can be part of this particular answer. So all these aspects can be included here. Now, this aspect of tenure was also discussed in the DNS of 22nd July 2019. So if you go through this DNS, you can see that all these aspects which I have just stated were discussed in detail. So you can conclude by saying here that RTI is an important institution for highlighting, for ensuring transparency and accountability. Hence, the government must ensure that it remains so, as was emphasized through the RTI Act of 2005. So this can be a conclusion for your particular answer. Moving further. So again, reasons for opposition of RTI amendment bill was also discussed. As I said, it was discussed in quite detail in this particular DNS. So to have a thorough understanding on this topic, you can go through this particular DNS dated 22nd July. Now again, RTI or different aspects of RTI was again taken up in the November edition of the Focus magazine, where again, all these aspects, not only about the benefits of RTI, the challenges of RTI, but also about the impact of our 2019 amendment was also discussed in detail in this magazine. Now let's move to the next question. It says, how far do you think, again, cooperation, competition, and confrontation have shaped the nature of federation in India? Now, the moment it says that shaped the nature of federation in India, we have to give a certain historical aspect. And if it's better if you mentions about State Reorganization Act, where for the first time states were reorganized based on administrative principles. However, it was Andhra Pradesh which was bifurcated for the first time on grounds of language. So we see that the nature of federation has changed over a period of years, because earlier there were lesser number of states, and slowly as we progressed as a nation, the number of states increased. So now that is one part. The second part is regarding, do you think that cooperation, competition, and confrontation have shaped the nature of federation in India? The second part is, cite some recent examples to validate your answer. See, again, UPSC has combined or merged the aspects of core and current together. So without giving recent examples, you will not be able to complete this particular answer asked on a very important topic of Indian Federation. So you can start by mentioning about, you can start by mentioning that about the Union of India, the nature of Indian Union, and then you can go ahead regarding the aspect of cooperation, competition, and confrontation. Now, regarding cooperation, various institutions have been provided in the Constitution and other legislation, such as Interstate Council, Zonal Council, and Northeast Council. So these are the bodies through which center coordinates with the states on various aspects of development and other measures. Regarding competition, the whole purpose of establishing or replacing Niti Aayog with Planning Commission was to further ensure the aspect of competitive federalism. And Niti Aayog, through various indices and reports, have ensured this. Now, the examples can be Delta ranking, which is provided through Aspirational District Program, Composite Water Management Index, SDG India Index, and other indices. So these indices basically make state compete against each other on welfare programs. So it effectively overall helps in improving governance at grounds level. Because if you talk about Aspirational District Program, it highlights about health, nutrition, agriculture, infrastructure, etc. So if different districts of a state are competing with each other at that level, at ground level in all these aspects, so it not only helps in overall growth of that particular area, but also overall development. Now, development is a very important word, as it is all inclusive, and it also includes the aspect of health, education, and standard of living. And these parts have been asked or taken up by UPSC in the next question, which we'll take up. So this is the aspect of competition. Now, regarding confrontation, various examples are there regarding confrontation. States passing resolution against NPR or NRC, right? Two states fighting with each other on interlinking of rivers, right? We have center-state constrained relationship, especially with respect to GST revenue, or what you know as GST compensation cess mechanism. So all these can be highlighted, certain examples of confrontation between states or center and states. So it says that how far do you think cooperation, competition, and confrontation have shaped the nature of federation in India? Cite some recent examples to validate your answer. So these can be certain examples which you could have highlighted to validate your answer, that how the nature of Indian federation has developed over a period of years. And in conclusion, you can say that nevertheless, Article 1 of the Indian Constitution, which mentions that India shall be a union of states, has overall ensured that India still remains a union of states. So this should be a conclusion on the constitutional principles based on which the Indian Union was envisaged then. It still remains now. Nevertheless, various constitutional development, or rather federal development, has taken place, and this also shows the flexibility or the kind of federation which we have, where we are ready to accommodate the views of other states. So it's basically an infighting among a house. So the center at times agrees for certain demands of the states. And these demands can be farm laws, not taking up certain aspects of NPR, any other thing. So all these can be incorporated in your answer. So again, the point to be highlighted here is two. You should have thorough understanding of the topic along with recent current affairs or current events or development of current events. And second, answer writing, without which you cannot succeed further. Now, again, this aspect of convergence, collaboration, and competition was taken up in the DNS of 20th March 2019, where all these aspects are related to aspirational district program was discussed. Further, even role of Niti Aayog in center-state relationship was taken up in the DNS dated 2nd April 2020. Again, the aspect of NPR taken up in the Focus magazine and also discussed in DNS of 22nd December 2019. So these different aspects or underlying aspects are discussed whenever they appear in the news. For you, what's important is to understand these underlying or current events. Again, as you see, aspirational district program, Niti Aayog taken up in DNS and also discussed in the, taken up in the Focus and also discussed in the DNS. Same aspect as I said about health, nutrition, education, agriculture, financial inclusion, basic infrastructure, etc. All these aspects have been provided there. So, okay. So from governance, let's move to the important topic of social justice. See, when we talk about social justice, justice is basically, when we talk about social justice here, justice basically refers to that part of poverty, and the second aspect is deprivations. Now, these two are very important to understand this aspect of social justice. So if we are saying that someone needs social justice, the question is why? Why a section of the population needs social justice or political justice or economic justice? So when we talk about these kind of justices, number one, or the point which is important, is their inclusion in the mainframe or within the mainstream of the society. This inclusion can be through political representation, economic inclusion, or even social inclusion if they have been outcasted in some of the societies, which still takes place in some of the remote areas of the country. So against all these poverty, these aspects of poverty and deprivation, Government of India has not only made legislation, but also has ensured number of welfare schemes which reaches out to the vulnerable sections of the population. And if you see the syllabus, it says government policies and interventions for development in various sectors. Now these various sectors becomes important. It further says welfare schemes for vulnerable sections of the population. Also issues relating to development and management, both aspects, development and management of social sector services relating to health, education, and human resources, and also issues relating to poverty and hunger. So while going through your classes of social justice, please focus on this part of the syllabus and keep your handy notes ready, especially regarding poverty, hunger, health, education, and other aspects of government schemes and human resources. So based on this understanding, these questions were asked by UPSC. As I have said, 4 questions was taken up by UPSC. Now this question was on geriatric and maternal health care. That is, now this means health care of the elderly. Another question was taken on incidence and intensity of poverty regarding United Nations Multi-Dimensional Poverty Index. Now, when we talk about multi-dimensional poverty index, we mean that we are calculating poverty not only through one prism, but through multiple prisms. So this is the basic understanding of this question. Next question is microfinance as an anti-poverty vaccine. See this term, anti-poverty vaccine, aimed at asset creation and income security of the rural poor in India. Evaluate the role of self-help groups in achieving the twin objectives along with empowering women in rural India. Number of statements of phrases, but overall the point is that how does self-help groups empowers women? Again, we are talking about financial empowerment and also social empowerment. So both these aspects have been taken up by UPSC as an underlying theme. and this question on National Education Policy of 2020. It was in news, hence a question asked by UPSC. So even if you go through these questions as by taken up by UPSC, even in social justice, again, aspects of your core basic or conventional understanding of a theme is important, along with the day-to-day current events. For example, the recent report of United Nations Multidimensional Poverty Index and also National Education Policy. So you need to have a thorough understanding, and your approach must be analytical to solve these questions. Now, regarding different questions asked by UPSC in the previous years, as I highlighted here, that important topics in social justice which you need to study is that social and economic welfare, steps of government, aspects of poverty and hunger. And here you also need to understand the relation between nutrition and calorie. And as you will study in your class, you will find out that there is a D-link between calorie and nutrition. Further, about health and educational parameters and development and various schemes of the government regarding all these aspects, regarding material deprivation, poverty line, calories, nutrition, link or D-link, social and financial inclusion, and political representation. So all these aspects becomes important when you study about social justice. So as you can see, similarly, questions on growth vis-a-vis development has been taken up. Questions on poverty and hunger has been taken up previously by UPSC. Again, questions on poverty alleviation programs has been taken up by UPSC. So study those basic topics and also keep an eye on the various current developments along with the welfare schemes, especially regarding social justice issues. Now, if you go through the mains questions taken up in the mains test series, see, almost similar lines. Roadmap for poverty estimation in India should move beyond the current obsession with income approach. So the point here, which is highlighted here, is that in India, we have an obsession of defining poverty only through one prism of income. But we forget the other aspect of development, that is through nutrition, health, education, etc. So all these aspects of defining poverty must be included. And this is what was highlighted in the Multidimensional Poverty Index report. It says that highlight other indicators. So these are the other indicators that can be taken into account while estimating for poverty in India. Similarly, next question was on NGO and SHG. Again, asked by UPSC question on SHG. And this question was taken up because recently Government of India said that it was thinking to increase the marriage age for women from 18 to 21 years. So the question basically correlated the health about the age of marriage with that of health of the mother and child. So while studying about these social developmental issues, have a thorough and an open mind for understanding these different topics. Now see, this has been taken up from your blue book of social issues or social justice. So you can see this aspect or concept of poverty, measurements of poverty, consequence of poverty in India has been dealt with quite detail. Similarly, aspects of justice, liberal, socialist, natural justice, retributive justice, and different other kinds of justice, including John Rawls' theory of justice has been taken up. John Rawls' theory is important, as previously a question has been taken up by UPSC. Similarly, different kinds of welfare has also been taken up in your blue books. So please go through these blue books and try to have your own understanding, right? As these basic understandings are important to answer these questions. So finally, let's take up this particular question asked by UPSC this year. Now it says the incidence and intensity of poverty are more important in determining poverty based on income alone. So in this context, analyze the latest United Nations Multidimensional Poverty Index report. See, very simply, you need to understand that poverty needs to be measured through different angles. And these different angles are health, education, and standard of living, right? So what the point UPSC wanted you to know was that, how do you understand poverty? How is poverty defined? How does society views poverty as? So UN has come up with these different or these 10 indicators, namely nutrition, child mortality, years of schooling, school attendance, cooking fuel, sanitation, etc. Right? See, these 10 indicators are in way mentions or highlight about the aspect of deprivation. So deprivation is important to understand poverty. How much a person or a child is deprived, right? In what ways a particular child is deprived. So these aspects becomes important. And if you go through this slide, then these are the different highlights of this report. So all these highlights becomes important while going through this particular question, and all these aspects have been included in your answer. So, overall, since I'm concluding this session, Mangal sir will take up the session of IR, and then overall we'll take up your queries. So we can say this has been, or this can be, your key takeaway with respect to this overall discussion which we just had. You need to have conceptual clarity on core or conventional topics or themes which we just took, or other themes also. You need to have an awareness on current events which is associated with your core part of the syllabus. You cannot ignore any part of the syllabus. It's not at all advised, as we have seen that UPSC have touched almost every corner of the syllabus of GS2, especially in polity, governance, constitution, and social justice. Now, you can prepare your own notes for revision on key topics, as it will prove handy while answering question, or at least giving you confidence when you see such kind of questions which you have already revised or studied properly. And lastly, and the most important thing is that please, as soon as possible, start the answer writing practice sessions, because unless and until you write a particular concept, you will not understand what are the mistakes you make. And it is here where we can help you or guide you regarding with respect to writing proper answers. So from here, I hand over this session to Mangal sir. He will talk with you, or he will discuss with you about international relations, and he'll go through with you the different questions taken up by UPSC.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Sorry for bothering you on a Sunday morning. As most of you are not showing your faces, I understand you have not taken up your bath or you are not prepared for this session. So I'll be taking you through the international relations sections from the General Studies paper 2. Okay. Fine. Yesterday also we looked at some of the important dynamic sections of the General Studies paper 3. And today again we are here with another dynamic section of General Studies paper 2, that is international relations. Now, as you have covered most of the static portions of the General Studies paper 1, 2, and 3, that is economy, polity, or history or geography, we understand that international relations is more of a difficult section to handle as far as the current affairs are concerned, or how to handle these questions that come in the exam in the real time. So that is one of the challenges that we face while handling the international relations. So for this, I'll take you through the syllabus, which is, of course, the most important part. After that, we will look how UPSC has been asking questions. Finally, why current affairs form a very important part in the preparation of international relations, and what role will your foundation classes play in this preparation of the section of international relations. So first, let us understand the relative importance of international relations in the General Studies paper 2. If you go through this distribution, Navid sir has already discussed this, you find that almost around questions worth 50 marks are asked in the General Studies paper 2. Right? Now, international relations, as far as the other portions are concerned, polity, social justice, international relations, you all focus mostly on the polity and governance part in the General Studies paper 2. But we tend to ignore international relations, or we understand that whenever a question is asked in the exam, we will be able to handle it. For example, this year we had questions on quadrilateral security dialogue, right? We had a question on WHO. We had a question on Indo-US defense deals. And we all have studied about them in the current affairs classes or in the newspapers or the magazines that we read, etc., right? But if you look at the questions closely, you will find that they were not that easy to handle. So for that, first, how to prepare part, let us look at the syllabus of the international relations. Now, international relations in the UPSC syllabus has been divided into 4 parts. First is India and its neighborhood relations. Second is bilateral, regional, and global groupings, which involve India or are affecting India's interests. Third part is effect of policies and politics of the developed and developing countries on India's interests. And another important part in this section is Indian diaspora. And finally, important international institutions, agencies, fora, their structure and mandate. So whatever has been written in the syllabus itself gives you a cue of preparation of international relations. What is important for India's existence? Yesterday, we looked at the threats that India faces internally. Now we'll be looking at the concerns for India as far as external threats or external relations of India are concerned. So first botheration for India is its neighborhood, of course. Second botheration for India as far as international relations are concerned are its groupings, or of which grouping India is a part. So for example, we know that India is a, okay. So we all know that India is a part of the United Nations, right? India has been playing a key role in almost all the bodies of United Nations, right? We want a permanent membership of the UN Security Council. So that is how all the groupings that are concerned, or the global groupings are concerned, and that is where role of India will come into play. Then there are agreements which either involve India or those agreements which affect India's interests. So for example, we all know that India had been going on, or the discussions had been going on regarding the regional comprehensive economic partnership between ASEAN and its 6 free trade agreement partners. However, at the last moment, India withdrew from that agreement. And that is because India had concerns regarding its own personal interests. Then there are, besides these two important aspects, there are policies of different countries that also affect India's interests. Now we know that China is pursuing aggressive policies in India's neighborhood through its Belt Road Initiative, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, etc. Right? So these are a cause of concern for India. So these are the policies that are being followed by either developed world or the developing world. Then the policies of United States of India also impact India's interests. Third important pillar of India's international relations are its diaspora. We know international relations consist of hard power, which includes the military power, and then there is soft power. And that is where the role of Indian diaspora comes in. And finally, there are international institutions, their relevance, what they are doing to improve international relations, or how are they handling the problems that the global community is facing. So for example, we see that World Health Organization had a role to play during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we see a question in the examination. So the syllabus has been clearly defined, and these are the important pillars of international relations, and accordingly, questions are asked on these particular themes which have been outlined in your syllabus. So first, let us look at the questions that have been asked from these parts of the syllabus this year also, and also previously how the questions were asked. So as far as the first part of syllabus is concerned, India and its neighborhood relations, we see that we have seen the impact of China, how it is using its economic relations and positive trade surplus to impact India's neighborhood. Directly, the impact of policies of China has been merged with the India and its neighborhood relations, right? Second question is related to future of SAARC, clearly related to India's neighborhood relations. We all know that India and Pakistan have been having several issues since independence, and recent terror attacks, etc., made India to not join the SAARC meetings, and that is why the future of SAARC came into question. Then we have been asked to evaluate economic and strategic dimension of India's Look East policy in the context of post-Cold War international relations. Now, international relations are not just what is happening right now. It also includes majority of the events that have happened in the past, and they shape our present international relation policies. So for example, when India got independent, we were active player in the non-alignment movement. And that was basically an organization or a platform where all the countries which recently got decolonized or got independence from the colonial powers were collaborating. And they were pursuing the interests of these newly independent nations. However, after that, since the Cold War has ended, the world has become unipolar. Russia's dominance in the global politics has decreased, and that is where the dimensions of international relations have been changing. And accordingly, we have been asked to evaluate India's look-east policy from economic and strategic dimensions, especially after post-Cold War international scenario. Finally, as I have already mentioned, the foreign policy consists of hard power as well as soft power. Indian diaspora had a very important role to play in the soft power. And again, we have been asked the question of Project Mausam, which is a cultural initiative or initiative of Ministry of Culture regarding connecting all the old maritime cultural countries with which India had its contacts. So that is how soft power has been playing a role in the international relations as well. So all these aspects have been included in India and its neighborhood. Surprisingly, there was no question this year in the mains examination related to this particular aspect. Then the next important thing is bilateral, regional, and global groupings, agreements involving India or affecting India's interest. First question that you see here was asked in the year 2018. This question is related to Ashgabat Agreement. Now, what is this Ashgabat Agreement related to? It is related to connectivity and transportation in the Central Asian region, of which some of the Central Asian countries are part. Also, Iran and India are also the part of this agreement. So definitely it involves India's interest, which is a regional grouping, and it involves India's interest. Now, we all know that there are some major happenings that are going on across the globe in terms of geopolitics. We know that India has been actively pursuing its interests in the Chabahar port in Iran. So this Ashgabat Agreement will come handy because India is pursuing its interests in the Chabahar port, and through that port, India wants a greater connectivity so that it can pursue its interests in the Central Asian region. So that is where the role of Ashgabat Agreement comes into play. And that is why this was signed, I think, in 2016, and a question was asked in 2018. Again, current affairs, a question is asked. Fine. Second question is related to India's relations with Israel. Question was asked in 2018. Why was this question asked? Because in 2017, Prime Minister Modi became the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Israel. So that was a very symbolic and important moment as far as India-Israel relations were concerned. So there are also a kind of history is involved in this India-Israel relations. So that is the past of India-Israel relations. Now we know that there is a conflict between Israel and Palestine, which is a very famous dispute in the West Asia or the Middle Eastern region, right? Now there, what happens is that because Israel and Palestine have been fighting and India had got its independence from a colonial power, so India was against any kind of aggression by Israel on the Palestinian territory. And India has always supported the statehood of Palestine. However, of late we see that it has become important for India to pursue its interests, and that is why we have created a new policy as far as Israel is concerned, which is known as de-hyphenation policy. That is, we continue to support the Palestinian cause. However, that will not cost India its relations with the Israel. So we are also focusing on improving our relations with Israel. Now, why is Israel so important? We note that Israel is surrounded by most of adverse nations which are anti-Israel, right? And they support the cause of Palestine. India also has a similar geographic location. We are surrounded by Pakistan, which is an adverse neighbor. We are supported by China, which is an adverse neighbor. Now, Israel has been handling its issues so properly, it has a good amount of defense or military might, and that can come handy for India, right? So that is how you interlink things, okay? So again, as 2017 was an important visit by the Prime Minister of India to Israel, it was first since independence, and that is why a question was asked in 2018. Then again, the next question, as I have already mentioned, India played a key role in the non-alignment movement, but that role is now changing, right? India is now indulging into the great game. That is, India wants to emerge as a very important global leader, or you can say that India wants to be in the club of superpowers. And that is why the question came, the long-sustained image of India as a leader of the oppressed and marginalized nations has appeared on the account, or has disappeared on the account of its newfound role in the emerging global order. We note that India is a key player of G20, which is a very important economic association or economic organization. Further, India is trying to counter the Chinese influence. It is part of important global groupings that aim at countering China. Quadrilateral security dialogue is one of them, right? Then India-Japan relations, they have always been good, aimed at a common enemy, China. We have been building up economic partnerships. So these are few strands in the international relations that keep on recurring. And if you know about the important events that are happening globally, you can incorporate these in writing your answers. That is the first thing. And lastly, we see in 2020, a question was asked from this particular aspect, which is, what is the significance of Indo-US defense deals over the Indo-Russian defense deals discussed with reference to stability in the Indo-Pacific region? This question was for 250 words. We will discuss this question later, but this was just to give an idea how current affairs give you a cue as to what can be asked in the examination. Clearly, we saw Ashgabat Agreement being signed in 2016. A question was asked in 2018. Indian Prime Minister visited Israel. A question was again asked. Then we see that Indo-US defense deals were recently signed at the 2+2 dialogue. A question was asked in 2020. Fine. Next theme here is effects of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interests and the Indian diaspora. Now, firstly, if you look at the questions, you will see that in the year 2018, a question was asked related to the controversy related to US-Iran nuclear pact controversy and what could be its possible impact on India, or how should India respond in such a scenario. Now, we all know that in 2017, Donald Trump administration had withdrawn from the US-Iran pact, right? Which is famously known as the Iran deal, right? It was finalized back in 2015 under Obama administration, and it was seen as a game changer in the West Asia. However, because of unpredictable policies of Donald Trump, he withdrew from this pact. And that is where we were required to analyze the impact that it could have on India's interests in that particular region. So a question was asked in 2018. Again, current affairs asked in 2018 in the mains examination, keeping in mind its impact on India. The next question reads, what introduces friction into the ties between India and US is that Washington is still unable to find for India a position in its global strategy, which would satisfy India's national self-esteem and ambitions. Now we see that of late, United States of America has seen that China is rising economically. It is pursuing aggressive policies, and that is affecting US's interest in the Indo-Pacific region badly. And that is why it is actively participating or taking interest in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, as far as Indo-Pacific region is concerned, we all know that India has a very key role to play here. And that is why this question has been asked, that is, what could be the possible role of India as far as the United States of America's strategy or global strategy is concerned in the Indo-Pacific region. So this question in 2019. Now look at the questions that were asked this year. This year, the questions were related to quadrilateral security dialogue, which has been in news continuously. Every week or every month, we see articles related to quadrilateral security dialogue, right? And that is why we see a question in 2020. However, the formation of the question was a bit tricky this time. So we will discuss it later, right? Another important part of this syllabus is Indian diaspora, which I've already mentioned plays a key role in the soft power. They bring back remittances to India, which is important for India's economic growth story. They play a key role in the countries in which they are located, right? So a question was asked in 2017 related to Indian diaspora and its role in the Southeast Asian countries. Now, why was this question asked in 2017? We know India was participating in talks for finalization of regional comprehensive economic partnership. And this RCEP is an agreement or a dialogue or a economic partnership dialogue between ASEAN countries and the 6 free trade partners. So as ASEAN countries are important from the RCEP perspective, a question was asked in the Indian diaspora part regarding the diaspora that plays important role in the Southeast Asian countries. This year, a question was asked regarding Indian diaspora has a decisive role to play in the politics, economy of America and European countries. Comment with example. Now, why this question this year? if you remember, an event was organized in United States of America, which was known as Howdy Modi, and where our Prime Minister addressed the Indian community that is living in United States of America. This clearly outlines or clearly highlights that Indian Prime Minister or Indian government sees this diaspora that is living in United States of America as an asset. Again, Donald Trump visited India in February. This also highlights that he has particular interest in the Indian diaspora because elections were there in the United States of America in 2020. Now, if you have gone through the election results, you will find that the margins are very close in United States of America's elections, right? If you see the results of major states, you'll find that 49% are won by Democrats sometimes, or 50% votes are won by Republicans sometimes. And the Indian community that lives in United States of America comprises about 1% of its population. And that is where the Indian diaspora can play a very critical role. Hence, the role it has to play in the politics of that particular country. The vice president that has been elected is Kamala Harris. She is a person of Indian origin. Again, highlights the importance of Indian diaspora living in United States of America. So we see that, and as far as Canada is concerned, which is also a part of America, we see are very important communities. Sikh community has a very important role to play in Canada. One of its ministers or defense or their cabinet ministers are from the Sikh community. Their main opposition leader is a member of Indian origin person, right? So that is how these the Indian diaspora can play a very critical role in the politics and economy of the America and European countries. These visits made it slightly clear that a question can be asked on this particular aspect. So again, current affairs and having an idea as to what exactly is happening across the globe. I have not touched the economy part in this question. Even if you look at the economy part, we see that India is an IT superpower, information technology superpower. India is the largest exporter of information technology related services. Most of the Indians or the IT related Indians are working in Americas and in European countries. Fine. Some of the Indian origin people are the heads of important multinational organizations like Google or Microsoft, Satya Nadella and Sundar Pichai, not to mention more. So they are playing a key role in their economy. So that is why this was a particularly expected question, although most of us missed on this aspect. Next is a very interesting topic. It is fairly predictable and can be easily prepared for the mains examinations. Important international institutions, agencies, fora, their structure and mandate, and what are the issues that these international organizations are facing. A question was asked in 2019 related to UNESCO. Now, US had withdrawn from UNESCO and in that year. And why had US withdrawn? Because UNESCO was passing resolutions in favor of Palestine against Israel, which is a country which has had extremely good relations with the United States of America. And that is why US had withdrawn from the UNESCO, and in that year, a question was asked. Reform of the WTO. We see of late there has been rise of nationalism and protectionism as far as the global trade is concerned. In this scenario, when the countries are pursuing protectionist policies, the role of WTO becomes very important, or the World Trade Organization becomes very important. However, issue here is that WTO functions on the basis of consensus among its members. And even if one member refuses, WTO cannot function or cannot decide on the final path in which it has to take decisions. And that is where appointments into the appellate body of the WTO, which is one of the important dispute redressal body of the WTO, has been facing issues because US has been blocking the appointments to the appellate body of the WTO. And this issue had emerged back in 2017 and 18. It is still a continuing issue. A question was asked in 2018. So everybody had a fair idea as to what issues the WTO is facing in that year if one had gone through the current affairs, and you could have easily prepared this aspect from the exam point of view. Now let us, then there was a question in 2015. This is a perpetual question regarding the United Nations Security Council. We note that India has been actively pursuing the permanent seat. Recently, we got elected into as a non-permanent member of the UNSC, and that is why this question in 2015. And the most predictable question of this year, as far as international relations was concerned, was the role of WHO. We have been seeing its role in the COVID-19 pandemic. It came into question. That is why we were required to critically examine the role of WHO in the global health security. The question was asked in 2020. So what are the takeaways from this particular analysis? We see that current affairs will play a very important role. Terms mentioned in the syllabus, they are very important. So whenever you are going through any current affair, that is the newspaper reading, Daily News Simplified, Focus Magazine, Compass, you need to keep these things in mind, or what are the important events that are happening globally, and questions can be asked based on them. Fine. After this, let us take up the let us take up the question discussions. First, we will take up the question related to WHO. Now, WHO, we all know that its role came into question during the COVID-19 pandemic. And you can see, if you have gone through this DNS of 31st May, this news article says that Trump cuts ties with World Health Organization as COVID-19 grips Latin America. And again here, we have shown you the reference of another DNS of 20th April, which says if WHO has limitations, these have been imposed on it by the nations who are part of WTO. What does this say? On the one hand, we have a problem with the working of WHO. On the other hand, we have a news article which is highlighting that why is WHO facing these issues, or why has it been showing limitations in its functioning? So that part is also covered in the current affairs. Now let's take up this question. So it reads, critically examine the role of WHO in providing global health security during the COVID-19 pandemic. And details of working of the WHO and how it was working during the COVID-19 pandemic was discussed in DNS of 30th March 2020. That is right at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. In this, we have clearly discussed what are the powers of WHO and how has it responded during the pandemic. Right? So for example, it can act upon non-state sources of information. However, it remained dependent upon official Chinese data. That is, it did not reveal what was happening inside China. It ignored the whistleblowers from China. Right? It agreed with the Chinese stand that the COVID-19 does not have a human-to-human transmission. So that is where the role of WHO came into question. And again, in the DNS of 31st May, we have highlighted what are the allegations against WHO. So we are critically examining the role of WHO in providing global health security. So in this, it did not hold the China accountable for misreporting the developments in Wuhan. Secondly, as late as January, the WHO had insisted that there was no human-to-human transmission of this disease. Finally, it warned nations against imposing any kind of travel bans on flights from China. And because of this ignorance, every country had to impose a lockdown. Still, we see that these measures are there, that you cannot freely travel across countries, right? And that was because of the wrong role that was played by WHO at that time. And there was delayed declaration of COVID-19 as a pandemic as late as March. Then what were the issues in the functioning of WHO? That we also discussed in the DNS of 31st May here. And in this, we have seen that since the establishment of WHO, world has not witnessed a pandemic of this scale. So this COVID-19 pandemic was of unprecedented spread across the globe. Secondly, in the functioning of WHO, we say that there has been dominance of the global powers because it is dependent upon the funding from these member countries, and the rich countries have an undue influence in the functioning of WHO. Then we have also highlighted that the blame lies in the way Chinese state operates. We see that other countries like the United States of America or India, they are democracies, but China is a very closed nation. It does not reveal information very easily. And that is why WHO could not ascertain as to what is happening inside China. And in the election of the head of WHO, these member countries play a key role. Fine. So that is why we have highlighted what were the issues in the functioning of the WHO. And finally, we have seen Finally, we have highlighted what are the reforms that India should push for WHO as to strengthening the autonomy or giving more powers to WHO. So clearly we have highlighted that although WHO did not function that well, but in that area, we have highlighted what are actually the issues in the functioning of WHO. And then we have provided certain suggestive measures. So as you can see, these current affairs were everywhere in the news articles or in the Daily News Simplified videos, in the Focus magazine, etc. However, to polish this issue, you could have pursued the mains test series. In that, we have clearly written a focused answer on this particular aspect. Same question was asked in the mains examination. In the wake of COVID-19, the functioning of WHO has come under scanner, discuss the factors that are hampering WHO's functioning, further suggest measures in this regard. Right? So in this, we have used the answer structure, how you could have approached this answer. We have highlighted what WHO is and why its role has come into question. Then we have highlighted the factors that are hampering WHO's functioning. And at the end, we have given the suggestions for improving the WHO's functioning, right? So clearly we have taken a stand that although WHO has had certain issues in its functioning, it still is relevant. However, the way in which it is functioning can further be improved by the member countries who are part of the WHO. Then this was again covered in the mains compass, right? In this, the challenges with respect to organizations functioning, etc. were covered. So simply it needs to be highlighted that whenever an international organization is there in the news, a question can be expected in the mains examination, and it is fairly easy to prepare that particular section. However, if you look at this next question that was asked in the same year, it reads about the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, about which almost every one of us have read in the newspaper, or we have seen the analysis in the DNS or in any particular magazine. But the question here was tricky. It required us to identify that Quadrilateral Security Dialogue is transforming itself into a trade bloc from a military alliance in the present times and discuss. So UPSC has played with words here. We all have been hearing that Quadrilateral Security Dialogue aims at countering the rise of China. It is a security dialogue. The name itself says it, right? But UPSC has been asking that it is transforming itself into a trade bloc. So what stand will you take here? It's kind of confusing, right? Now, why did UPSC use this term that it is transforming itself into a trade bloc from a military alliance? That was because if you had gone through the DNS of 8th October 2020, in that there was an editorial which was related to Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. And if you had read this editorial properly, you will find that it was the first time the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue had revealed that what talks are going on between the Quad. And it institutionalized that there will be annual meeting of the finance ministers of the member countries of the Quadrilateral group. Fine. Further, these countries will work on improving connectivity, on improving infrastructure, and on improving supply chain. So what this highlights, if finance ministers are meeting, if they are focusing on building infrastructure, if they are focusing on connectivity and supply chain, and they are focusing on combating pandemic, this means that it is kind of transforming itself into an economic bloc, right? Because it was the first time these details were revealed. So that is why UPSC used this particular term. However, often we have a tendency to ignore this because we are so impressed with the main idea that Quad is a military bloc. But you could have taken a stand that although the Quad group is presently focusing on the economic aspects, but it clearly has a military agenda, right? And that is visible in the Malabar naval exercise, which again comprises of the same members, which is a military exercise. It comprises of India, US, Japan, and Australia, which are the members of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. And India insisted that Australia should join this Malabar naval exercise. And in this particular year, Australia was the one which joined the Malabar naval exercise. And again, this was in news, right? Then there was another event. And if you look at these headlines in the Daily News Simplified, you'll find that Quadrilateral home truths. Then we have seen that Quad worried about China's gross aggression. What does this highlight? They are all concerned about the aggressive and assertive China. Fine. I hope you're understanding. Nod Okay. Then next is India has signed geospatial cooperation deal with the United States of America. Why is India so eager to sign these defense deals with the United States of America? Because it wants to counter the Chinese aggression and rise in the Indo-Pacific region. And both India and US are the part of quadrilateral security dialogue. What does this highlight? This clearly highlights that quadrilateral security dialogue, although it has its aim of being a military alliance, initially it is focusing on improving the economic ties. And when it comes to a global strategy, it is never always about military alliances. Economic alliances or economic partnerships also play a clear role in highlighting or making a strategy against any particular geopolitical event. That is why the economic policies that the Quad is pursuing are also important for countering the rise of China, because China has become aggressive, or the rise of China has happened because of its economic prowess, right? So you have to balance. So not just focusing on one particular part, but focusing on the different aspects. And that requires a lot of brainstorming, understanding of the issue, what is happening. Newspaper reading becomes very important here. Going through the DNS videos, Focus magazine, that is going through different analysis related to this one particular very famous thing that is happening in the international relations becomes very important. Because that is how you will be able to handle the questions in the examination. Because questions will not be simply straightforward as to what is quadrilateral security dialogue. You will not get such simple questions here, right? Fine. Again, to polish this aspect, you should write answers in the mains test series. You already know it is up and running. So by writing answers or handling the situations right in the exam scenario, you'll be able to handle such questions in the real examination as well, right? Then we have covered this quadrilateral security dialogue in our Compass magazine as well. After this, let us take up this last question, which is about what is the significance of Indo-US defense deals over Indo-Russian defense deals, discussed with reference to the stability in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, we all know that Indo-Pacific has gained importance of late, right? All the countries which are members of the quadrilateral security dialogue are coming up with their conception of the Indo-Pacific region. We had a question in the mains test series. The term Indo-Pacific has gained currency due to changing world order. How is India's idea of Indo-Pacific different from the others, and what is the strategic importance of the region? If you look at the strategic importance of Indo-Pacific region, you will find that it is a multipolar region. It is a multipolar region contributing to more than half of the world's GDP and population. Very important region. Secondly, it is rich in mineral and marine resources. That is why the problem in South China Sea. Quadrilateral security dialogue, again, an important part of this. It has emerged as a hub of global trade and energy supply. Stable and secure Indo-Pacific region is an important pillar of India's strategic partnership. And it has important choke points like Bab al-Mandab and Malacca Strait. So all these things highlight that Indo-Pacific has gained currency of late, right? And all these countries are coming up with their conceptions of Indo-Pacific region. Now, the question here requires us to identify what is the significance of Indo-US defense deals over the Indo-Russian defense deals. We all know that Russia has been a very important defense partner of India. More than 60% of our imports of defense come from Russia. However, there has been an abrupt rise of China here in the Indo-Pacific region, and that is imbalancing the geopolitical scenario in this region. For that, what could be a short-term solution? Short-term solution could be India getting into Indo-US defense deals, which also has interest in the Indo-Pacific region. And that will allow India a greater amount of interoperability. Recently, India finalized the 5th foundational agreement, which is a part of the Indo-US defense deals. 4 were already finalized. That is why this question was asked this year. Now, you can also highlight some of the issues that, although in a short term, India is indulging into these defense deals with the United States of America, and that is mainly focused in countering China, the long-term goal of India should be the indigenization of its defense equipments. Okay. And for that, the Indo-US, Indo-Russian defense deals are still very important because it is the largest partner, one. Secondly, the Russian government has good amount of control over its defense exports. And it also helps India in technology transfers, which is a key role in the long-term strategy of indigenization of defense production of India, right? However, when it comes to Indo-US defense agreements, what happens is that in India and US, the majority of defense exporters are private companies or private corporations in the United States of America, on which US does not have much control. And that is where the technology transfer part comes into question. So clearly here, taking a stand that in the short term, to counter the rise of China, the Indo-US defense deals are very significant, very important. However, in the long run, India needs to ensure that it pursues or achieves its goal of indigenization of defense production. Fine. So these are the aspects. Again, how it was covered in DNS on 30th October, the Indo-US defense partnership is deepening. It was covered. In this, we have taken up a historical background of how Indo-US partnership has developed as far as the defense is concerned. We see that the US has been supporting India's entry into the NSG group, etc. And they have all been discussed here. Then we have clearly discussed the India-US Foundational Defense Agreements, and BECA, that was the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement, was finalized in the 2+2 dialogue on 28th or 29th of October. So these were the highlights of these agreements. And finally, we have highlighted what is BECA, that is the latest agreement that has been signed, and what will India gain from this agreement. This particular aspect was important for answering this aspect of the question. Fine. Now, after going through this discussion, I would highlight that in international relations, there are few aspects that you have to keep in mind while preparing. There are some important events that are happening globally. Just give me a second. Now, these important events that are happening globally include rise of China, decreasing superpower status of United States of America. Lot of churning is going on in the West Asian region. There has been growing mistrust against China because of the way it has handled the COVID-19 pandemic and the aggressiveness that it has shown recently towards Hong Kong, the Taiwan, India, etc. So these are the important strands that are happening as far as geopolitics is concerned. And if you have that thing in mind, you can use these things everywhere in the answer writing. As you can see, in this question also, we'll be writing the rise of China. That's an important thing. We see we want to secure Indo-Pacific region. In the quadrilateral security dialogue, again, the same thing came. So if you are aware of the global happenings, and if you keep on reading the newspaper, going through the analysis in the DNS, and writing as many tests, you will be able to handle the dynamic portion of international relations clearly. Now here, foundation classes that you attend will help you in having an understanding of the background of all the issues that are happening right now. For example, you will delve deep into the India-US relations, how they have evolved over years, or what has been India's policy towards West Asia. West Asia is also seeing a lot of churning. Iran nuclear deal is a issue in point. Then Israel and the Arabic countries are improving their relations, right? There has been assassination of nuclear scientists in Iran. So all these events are making India more concerned about its strategy towards the West Asia, right? So you have to keep an idea of what is happening across the globe, what are the things that are happening, and they can come handy in writing these answers in the real time. But if you go through the mains test series, practice as many questions as possible, you will be able to handle these questions easily in the examination. So by not just knowing about the Indo-US defense deals or by knowing about what quadrilateral security dialogue is, you will not be able to write the answers in the examination. So you have to handle similar kind of questions, not exactly the same questions, to be prepared for the mains examination, right? And you all might be knowing that the mains test series is already up and running. Do start writing the tests from here itself, right? Okay. Now me and Navid sir will take up questions related to this paper too.
There's an announcement for all of you, since you're asking so much about mains test series. So we'll be sharing with you a document regarding prelims test series as well as mains test series. Now these documents will provide you, will give you a sort of a guidelines about the test series, how you can join, and what should be the appropriate time for you to join them, so that you can best utilize these test series for your own advantage, so that you can easily crack civils prelims as well as mains examination. So go through those documents which we will share with you and try to understand and follow the guidelines which we have provided with respect to those test series.